just want to ask you, first of all, what you made of the answer you got in the House of Keys on Tuesday when you were on the topic of people displaying potentially offensive images in public.
The answer was pretty much what I was expecting, just a sort of recitation of the existing law that's in place. And obviously the question that you've got to ask yourself then is, well, if we have these laws, why couldn't we use them? And obviously it all depends on the specific circumstances, and that's completely understandable. But to my mind, the circumstances that we're talking about here are images being displayed that the general public generally I think felt were inappropriate to be displayed in a public space. So if the law doesn't allow for something to be done in that space, then maybe we do need to think again and look at those laws and say, well, do they need to be tweaked somehow, just so we can turn around and say, well, actually, no thanks, can you please take those images down? Maybe it doesn't even need to be anything harsher than that, perhaps.
This is a difficult subject matter, though, isn't it? Because who is the moral arbiter? Who gets to decide what ultimately is offensive and what isn't?
Well, to my mind, it is the general public. It isn't me or you. It isn't the police. It is simply the case that if people are doing something which the majority of people are turning around and saying, well, actually, we don't think this is acceptable. If you're upsetting or distressing a large number of people, that's the arbiter. That's the line that you're crossing. And I think it should be pretty straightforward to tell when you're doing that. You'll see the public reaction, I think, to things that are going on and to pictures that are being put up. And when there is such a strong reaction, I suppose, then it is pretty clear that something needed to be done.
And have you had many people come to you specifically, you personally, and say, listen, I'm really not happy with these images?
There have been a number of people, and it was more the surprise, actually, that nothing could be done. And again, it all comes down to the specific circumstances and the intent behind the display and all sorts of complex legal questions. But to my mind, if there are people that are feeling distressed, feeling that they can't take their kids out for whatever reason, because they don't want them to be exposed to these kind of images, then we need to have some kind of procedure in place where we can say we need to make sure that these images are at least being taken away, or maybe not being allowed in certain public spaces, but being allowed in others, at least so that people know where they can and can't go.
Is there not a risk that you encroach on people's free speech and freedom to protest as they will?
It's an interesting question. I suppose if the protest had been there with the traditional kind of placards and the wording and all that, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. No one's talking about free speech. No one is talking about saying, oh, they shouldn't have been allowed to protest. That's completely not what's on the cards here. What's on the cards here is saying if you are going to protest, absolutely fine, feel free to do so. But there are limits, I think, to what we as a society feel are acceptable ways of protesting, acceptable ways of displaying images. I mean, for example, if there were people who were outside protesting and throwing bottles through windows, that wouldn't be acceptable. There is a limit there to what we as a society consider is okay, and I think that's all we're talking about here. We're not talking about saying yes or no to protesting or yes or no to free speech. That's not even on the table. All we're saying is if you're going to be doing these things, absolutely fine. Just make sure that any images you are displaying aren't going to be distressing to the general public.
It is very emotive. You've used some choice words on Twitter to describe those who are opposed to abortion. You've called them anti-choice.
That's right.
How do you think that would make people on that side of the argument feel? And I assume there are some constituents of your own and the wider electorate who aren't in favour of legalising abortion. To call them anti-choice, that's pretty strong, isn't it?
No, not at all. I mean, the traditional, shall we say, descriptors of the two sides. I mean, there are far more than two sides to this argument. I think that tends to get lost in this debate. But the traditional way of referring to people is pro-choice and pro-life. Well, actually, in my experience, the people that are pro-choice are not anti-life. And so I think if referring to people as pro-life gives really the wrong impression about both sides of the argument. What we are talking about is essentially, to my mind at least, it is an issue about choice. If you have one group that is described as pro-choice, then an opposing group is obviously the opposite of that. That's essentially all I was referring to. I find it uncomfortable referring to a group as pro-life when actually I think everybody in this debate is pro-life.
Have you had much discussion with people on the other side?
I have actually quite a lot of engagement with people on both sides of the table, and it's been very, very useful, really informative, and it really is essential actually to engage with people who do have different views to me and different views to what my position is, because I might not be right. I accept that. I accept that there are a lot of nuances and a lot of things that actually I might be looking at it from one perspective and think the law is going to achieve a certain aim. Someone else with a different perspective will sit down and tell me, no, that's actually not what you're going to be doing. That's different. It is essential, and it has been an invaluable part of this process.
And when you speak to people on both sides of the debate, on both sides of the argument, does it influence the way you feel? Has it changed your mind at all? Because I suppose, and again, on both sides, there are people with very emotional stories to tell.
I think there are, and I think, again, you've got to be careful using the phrase both sides. There are far more than two sides to this particular issue, to this particular debate. And it is safe to say that, yes, my views have changed somewhat on a few of the issues that surround this as a result of talking with people on all sides of the conversation.
Which are the various other sides? I understand there's those who are pro-abortion, those who are anti-abortion. Where are the other sides in this debate?
See, that what you're doing there, I think that is oversimplifying this quite a lot. There are a lot of people out there who are pro-reforming the law because they want to see there be some greater liberties, shall we say, but actually don't necessarily want to go as far as the proposed law is going. There are other people who think we shouldn't be changing the law at all because where it is at the moment is perfectly adequate, and there are some people out there who think no, we shouldn't even have the law as it currently stands. We need to take us a step further back. So it is a very wide range of views on this.